You have a note somewhere. Maybe a journal, maybe your phone, maybe a sticky on a monitor you stopped reading 6 months ago. It says something about what you're going to change, how you're going to be different. You wrote it with full conviction. Then life resumed at its normal pace, and the note became wallpaper. This is not a discipline problem. It isn't a motivation problem. It's not even really a you problem, though it will feel like one every time you find the note again. Here's what's actually happening. The information you've been given about how people change is mostly wrong. Not wrong in the way a bad map is wrong. You can still navigate with a bad map if you pay attention. Wrong in the way a map of the wrong city is wrong. You've been orienting yourself by something that doesn't match the territory you're actually in. I kept a list once of every book I'd read about changing my behavior. 14 books in 2 years. I could have taught a seminar on the psychology of habit formation. I was also, during that same period, doing none of the things the books described. Knowing the research on delayed gratification did not make me more patient. Knowing the neuroscience of habit loops did not make my habits better. There was a gap between what I understood and what I actually did, and that gap was where everything was disappearing. What follows is 15 principles. Not new ones, not complicated ones, but examined from the angle that actually matters. Not what they are. What stops you from using them, and what changes when you finally do. The note you wrote? It wasn't wrong. The approach was. Before we begin, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I read every single one. It's always interesting to see where this reaches. Chapter 1. The marshmallow was never the point. Every broke person you know wanted things immediately. That's not a coincidence. Look at the actual pattern. The person who spends their raise before it clears. The person who quits the diet on day 4. The person with 17 unfinished projects and a new idea every Monday. These aren't failures of ambition. They're failures of timing. They want the right things. They just want them now, when now is the worst possible moment to have them. Here's what the research actually shows. In the 1960s, Stanford psychologist Walter Mischel sat children in front of a single marshmallow and gave them a choice. Eat it now, or wait 15 minutes and get 2. Then he followed those children for decades. The ones who waited had higher test scores, healthier bodies, better relationships, and significantly more career success. The ones who ate immediately didn't fail at everything, but they failed at more things, more often, in ways that compounded. The story usually stops there. What people miss is the interesting part. The children who waited successfully weren't gritting their teeth harder. They weren't running on superior willpower. They were doing something different entirely. They covered the marshmallow. They looked away. They sang to themselves. They reframed the whole situation, pretending the marshmallow was a picture of a marshmallow, something to look at rather than eat. They didn't resist the desire. They redirected it. That distinction matters enormously. Your brain has 2 systems that are constantly negotiating. The limbic system wants the marshmallow. It wants it right now, it's loud about it, and it does not care about your long-term financial plan or your body composition goals. This system is ancient, fast, and extremely persuasive. It was built for an environment where waiting often meant losing, where the fruit that wasn't eaten today might be eaten by something with teeth tomorrow. The prefrontal cortex can override it, but it's slower, it requires effort, and it runs on a depletable resource. You cannot out-willpower your limbic system indefinitely. That's not a character flaw. That's just neuroscience. I spent years believing discipline meant forcing myself through discomfort, pushing through resistance, white-knuckling past the urge. It worked sometimes, but it was exhausting, and the moment circumstances got harder, the whole structure collapsed. What I was missing was strategy, not stamina. The people who are genuinely good at delayed gratification don't experience it as deprivation. They've restructured the equation. They've made the future more real, more vivid, more emotionally compelling than the present temptation. The marshmallow doesn't disappear. It just stops winning. Here's a concrete way to do this. When you're about to make an impulse decision, a purchase, a skip, an avoidance, ask yourself 3 questions in sequence. How will I feel about this in 10 minutes? How will I feel about this in 10 months? How will I feel about this in 10 years? This forces your prefrontal cortex online. It extends your time horizon just long enough to change the calculation. Another technique is visualization, but not the soft kind. Not imagining success in abstract. Imagine yourself specifically 1 year from now if you make the disciplined choice today. Feel what that version of you feels. The quiet confidence, the compounded results, the absence of regret. Then imagine yourself 1 year from now if you don't. Hold both images. Let the contrast do the work. The compound effect of delayed gratification is not metaphorical. It is mathematically real. Every time you choose the longer view, you strengthen the neural pathway associated with that choice. You are literally, physically, rebuilding your brain toward future orientation. Studies show that people who practice this regularly stop experiencing it as sacrifice. They start genuinely preferring the long game. Not because they're virtuous, because the brain adapts to whatever you repeatedly do. This applies everywhere simultaneously. In money, it's the difference between spending and investing. In health, it's the difference between comfort now and energy for the next 30 years. In relationships, it's the difference between avoiding hard conversations and actually trusting someone. In work, it's the difference between collecting paychecks and building something. Warren Buffett held boring stocks through decades of volatility. Michael Jordan practiced when everyone else was at the party. Neither of them was gritting their teeth the whole time. They had restructured what felt rewarding. The long game had become, genuinely, more satisfying than the short one. That's the real lesson of the marshmallow. Not that you should suffer more. That you should get better at making the future feel real. In a world engineered to sell you the immediate option, the notification, the upgrade, the shortcut, the person who can genuinely wait has leverage that compounds quietly for years. While everyone else is consuming, you're building. While they're reacting, you're deciding. While they're wondering what happened, you're looking at exactly what you built. The marshmallow was never the point. Time was. Chapter 2. The voice that won't shut up. There's a person who follows you everywhere and says the worst possible things at the worst possible times. That person is you. Not metaphorically, literally. The voice in your head, the one running commentary on everything you do, everything you attempt, everything you fail at, is yours. You built it. You've been feeding it for years, and for most people, it has become something genuinely hostile. Not dramatically evil, just quietly, persistently corrosive. Like a leak you stopped noticing because it's always been there. Most people have between 12,000 and 60,000 thoughts per day. Research suggests the majority of them are negative, and the majority of those are repetitive. The same anxieties, the same self-criticisms, the same worst-case scenarios, cycling through on a loop that runs whether you're paying attention or not. This is your internal dialogue. And if you've never formally examined it, You are being governed by something you've never actually chosen to believe. Here's the uncomfortable part. You wouldn't tolerate this from another person. If someone followed you around all day saying you're not good enough, this is too hard, you're going to fail, everyone's judging you, you always do this, you would leave. You'd block their number. You'd describe them to friends as toxic. But when your own mind does it, you treat it as information. You treat it as truth. You absorb it, build your decisions around it, and carry it forward into the next day. The first thing to understand is this. You are not your thoughts. You are the observer of your thoughts. There's a meaningful difference. Thoughts arise automatically, shaped by past experience, fear, conditioning, and whatever mood your nervous system is in at 2 p.m. on a Tuesday. They are not reports from reality. They are proposals. You get to decide which ones you accept. But you can't decide if you're not paying attention. I once spent an entire afternoon tracking my thoughts in a notebook. Not to analyze them, just to see them. By the end, I was genuinely surprised. I hadn't noticed how many of them were variations of the same 4 or 5 fears, dressed up in different clothes every hour. Seeing them written down made them smaller somehow, less authoritative. There are 4 thought patterns that do the most damage, and they're worth knowing by name. The first is catastrophizing. Your mind jumps to the worst possible outcome and presents it as the likely one. You're late for a meeting and your brain suggests you're about to be fired. You feel an unfamiliar ache and your brain suggests something terminal. The worst case is almost never the actual case. But catastrophic thinking treats it as the default, which creates stress responses that damage your performance and make negative outcomes more likely, not less. The second is all or nothing thinking. You ate something unhealthy at lunch, so the day is ruined. You made a mistake at work, so you're incompetent. You had a bad week, so everything is falling apart. This pattern is particularly dangerous because it turns every minor setback into a full collapse. It removes the middle ground where most of real life actually happens. The third is personalization. Someone is rude to you in the morning, and you assume it's about you. A colleague seems distracted, and you assume you've done something wrong. The promotion goes to someone else, and you conclude it's evidence of your inadequacy. The reality is that most of what happens around you has nothing to do with you. People are carrying their own weight. But a personalizing mind keeps making you the center of everyone else's story. The fourth is mind reading. You assume you know what others are thinking, and you act on that assumption as if it were fact. Someone didn't smile when you walked in, so they must not like you. Your message went unanswered for 3 hours, so they must be angry. The presentation felt flat to you, so the audience must have been bored. You don't know. You never know. But the mind reads the situation anyway and treats the conclusion like confirmed intelligence. Once you can name these patterns, you can start working with them, not eliminating them. They're part of how the brain processes threat, but questioning them. The practice is straightforward. When a destructive thought appears, run it through 3 questions. Is this actually true? Is this helpful? What evidence do I have against it? Most of the time, the honest answers are, probably not, no, and quite a bit. The next step is replacement. Not forced positivity. That doesn't work, and the brain knows when it's being lied to. Something more precise. Instead of, I'm not good enough, try, I'm still learning this. Instead of, this always happens to me, try, this is happening now, and it will pass. Instead of, I'll never be successful, try, success takes longer than I want it to. These aren't affirmations. They're more accurate statements. Accuracy is what the brain accepts. Then there's the question technique. The quality of your thinking is determined by the questions you ask yourself. Disempowering questions. Why does this always happen to me? Why can't I get this right? Send your brain searching for evidence of failure. It will find what you ask it to find. Empowering questions. What can I learn from this? What's one thing I can adjust? Send your brain in a different direction. Same brain, different search query. Finally, there is self-compassion, which is not what most people think it is. It's not letting yourself off the hook. It's applying the same standard to yourself that you'd apply to someone you care about. When a friend fails at something, you don't call them an idiot. You ask what happened. You acknowledge it was hard. You help them figure out what's next. The voice in your head is allowed to do the same. Mastering your internal dialogue doesn't make you unrealistically positive. It makes you more honest. The goal is a mind that tells you the truth, including the uncomfortable truths, without adding a layer of cruelty on top. A mind that identifies problems without manufacturing catastrophes. A mind that is working with you, not against you. That voice is not going anywhere. The only question is who's in charge of it. You're still here. 2 chapters in, that's not nothing. Most people who clicked this video moved on before they got uncomfortable. You didn't. Which means something in here is hitting close enough to stay. If that's the case, subscribe. Not because this channel needs it, because the next time you want this kind of thinking, you'll want to find it without looking for it. That's all. Back to the part that actually matters. Chapter 3. No is a complete sentence. You're exhausted. Not because life is hard, because you keep saying yes to things you don't want to do. Look at your calendar. Look at your commitments. Look at the obligations sitting in your week that you didn't really choose. You just didn't refuse. The meeting that could have been an email. The favor that somehow became a recurring responsibility. The social event you agreed to in a moment of guilt and have been dreading ever since. None of these happened to you. You let them in. One yes at a time, usually under mild social pressure, usually because saying no felt worse in the moment than saying yes. This is how most people's lives get away from them. Not through catastrophe, through accumulation. Here's the arithmetic nobody does out loud. Every yes is a no to something else. When you say yes to the unnecessary meeting, you say no to the focused work that actually moves your career forward. When you say yes to the social obligation you resent, you say no to the rest you actually need. When you say yes to a good opportunity, you say no to a great one that might arrive next month. The yes feels like addition. It's actually subtraction. And most people are doing this math wrong every single day. The reason is psychological, and it runs deep. Human beings are wired for social approval. Saying no triggers the same neural pathway as social rejection. A genuine threat response, not a metaphorical one. Your brain interprets disappointing someone as dangerous, because for most of human history, being excluded from the group was dangerous. So the discomfort you feel when you're about to say no is not weakness. It's evolution. Understanding that doesn't make it go away, but it makes it less authoritative. I watched a colleague spend 3 years saying yes to every project that came her way. She was known as dependable, generous, always available. She was also quietly burning out, producing mediocre work across everything because she had nothing left to give any single thing. She was excellent at being busy. She had no idea what she was actually good at, because she'd never protected enough space to find out. Warren Buffett has a framework for this that's worth understanding precisely. He writes down the 25 things he most wants to accomplish. He circles the top 5. The other 20 don't become secondary priorities. They become the avoid at all costs list. Not because they're bad, because they're good enough to feel legitimate, which makes them dangerous. The merely good will always crowd out the genuinely great if you let it. The first step to saying no strategically is knowing what you're protecting. Most people can't say no effectively because they haven't decided what deserves a yes. Without a clear sense of your priorities, not in theory but in practice, in your actual schedule, every request looks plausible. Every opportunity seems worth considering. You have no filter, so everything gets through. Start with your long-term vision. Where do you want to be in 5 years? What kind of work do you want to be doing? What kind of person do you want to be? Once you can answer those questions with specificity, you have a decision filter. Every request can be run through it. Does this move me toward that? Or does it move me away? The answer doesn't have to be complicated, but you have to have something to measure against. Build a set of standard responses and use them. Not excuses. Explanations aren't required, and offering them invites negotiation. Just clean, polite, firm sentences. I appreciate you thinking of me, but I can't commit to that right now. That's not something I'm taking on this year. I have to decline, but I hope you find the right person. Notice these don't include a reason. A reason is an opening. Most people who struggle to say no give elaborate justifications, which signals that the decision is still in play. It isn't. The response is the complete communication. Learn to recognize manipulation when it arrives, because it will. The guilt trip, I guess I'll just figure it out myself. The false urgency, I need to know right now. The flattery, you're honestly the only person who could do this. The social proof, everyone else has already committed. These aren't malicious necessarily, but they work by triggering your emotional responses rather than your rational thinking. When you recognize the tactic, you can pause before you answer. Pause is everything. There are also different kinds of no worth distinguishing. Sometimes no to the request, yes to the relationship. I can't help with this, but let me connect you with someone who can. Sometimes no for now, not forever. I can't take this on right now, but ask me again in 6 months. Sometimes no to the full thing, yes to part of it. I can't attend the whole event, but I could contribute to the opening. These variations let you protect your priorities without damaging relationships unnecessarily. Be especially careful about recurring commitments. A weekly meeting looks small. Multiply it by 52, and it's more than 2 full days of your year. A monthly obligation sounds minor until it's been running for 3 years. Before saying yes to anything that repeats, multiply it out. If the total doesn't seem worth it, the individual instance isn't either. Create boundaries in advance before the request arrives. Decide how many evenings per week stay free. How many weekends stay yours. How much of your best cognitive energy goes to other people's priorities? When someone asks for something that violates these boundaries, you don't have to decide in the moment. You already decided. You're just reporting the outcome. The people who respect you will respect your no. The people who don't respect your no are exactly the people whose yes you should want least. Every master of achievement is also a master of elimination. The greatest work in any field, the books, the companies, the discoveries, the performances, happened because someone said no to nearly everything else. Not reluctantly, deliberately. They understood that focus is not doing fewer things because you have to. It's doing fewer things because you've decided what matters. Your no is not a wall, it's a direction. It tells you and everyone around you what you're actually building. Start small. Say no to something low stakes today. Notice that the discomfort passes faster than you expected. Notice that the relationship survives. Notice that the time you protected was worth it. Do it again tomorrow. The muscle builds exactly like any other. Saying no is not the end of a conversation. For the right life, it's the beginning. Chapter 4. Small and boring wins. The reason you haven't changed isn't laziness. It's that you keep trying to change dramatically. You've done this before. You decide to transform. You announce it, sometimes just to yourself, sometimes to others. You buy the equipment, download the app, set the alarm, clear the schedule. The first few days feel like momentum. Then life applies the smallest amount of friction. A bad night's sleep, a stressful afternoon, one skipped session, and the whole structure collapses. You're back where you started, plus some guilt. You wait for the next surge of motivation and repeat the cycle. This isn't a character problem, it's an engineering problem. The design is wrong. Most people approach habit change the way a contractor might build a skyscraper by starting with the top floor. Impressive vision. Structurally impossible. What actually works is the opposite. So small it seems almost insulting. So consistent it eventually becomes structural. Here's the mathematics that makes this worth taking seriously. If you improve by 1% every day for a year, you end up 37 times better than when you started. If you decline by 1% every day for a year, you decline to nearly zero. The difference between those two trajectories isn't dramatic daily decisions. It's tiny daily choices made consistently over time. The compound curve is invisible for months. Then it isn't. The problem is that your brain experiences habits on a different timeline than the one that matters. It evaluates actions based on immediate feedback. Good habits often have delayed rewards. The health benefits of exercise don't arrive this afternoon. The financial benefits of investing don't show up this quarter. Bad habits often have immediate rewards and delayed costs. The dopamine from the junk food arrives instantly. The damage arrives years later. Your brain is not being irrational. It's just being short-sighted. The fix isn't to feel differently. It's to design differently. I had a period where I tried to establish a writing habit 3 separate times. Each time I aimed for an hour a day. Each time I lasted about 2 weeks. The 4th time, I committed to 1 sentence. 1 sentence a day, no matter what. It felt absurd. It also worked. The sentence became a paragraph. The paragraph became a page. But the consistency was established at the sentence level. And that's what actually mattered. The first principle is identity. Most people set outcome-based habits. I want to lose weight. I want to read more. I want to exercise regularly. These are destinations, not behaviors. And because they're destinations, every day you haven't arrived feels like failure. The more effective frame is identity-based. Not, I want to run a marathon. I want to become a runner. Not, I want to write a book. I want to become a writer. The question shifts from did I achieve the outcome to did I act like the person I'm becoming? That question is answerable every single day, regardless of results. When identity is the anchor, the habit follows naturally. A runner runs, even on bad days, even for 10 minutes, even when it doesn't feel productive. Not because they're disciplined, because that's what runners do, and that's who they are. The second principle is starting smaller than feels reasonable. Want to exercise? Start with 2 push-ups. Want to meditate? Start with 60 seconds. Want to read more? Start with 1 page. Not as a permanent level, as an entry point. The goal of the minimum viable habit isn't to produce results from the habit itself. It's to establish the identity of someone who does the thing consistently. Once that identity exists, the habit expands naturally. But the consistency must come first. You cannot skip to intensity. Intensity without consistency is just an event. The third principle is environmental design, which most people underestimate because it sounds passive. Your environment shapes your behavior more powerfully than your motivation does. Motivation is a feeling. Environments are physical. If you want to eat better, removing the junk food from your kitchen will outperform any amount of willpower. If you want to read more, putting a book on your pillow will outperform every intention you set. Make the good behavior obvious and easy. Make the bad behavior invisible and inconvenient. You're not fighting yourself. You're rearranging the landscape. The fourth principle is habit stacking. Your brain already has grooved pathways for your existing routines. Attach new habits to existing ones, and you leverage that infrastructure rather than building from scratch. After I pour my coffee, I will write for 2 minutes. After I sit down at my desk, I will name my 3 most important tasks. After I put on my pajamas, I will read 1 page. The specificity matters. Vague intentions, I'll exercise more, I'll eat better, don't provide a trigger. The brain needs a when and a where to reliably execute. The fifth principle is immediate reward. Your brain repeats what it finds immediately satisfying. Long-term benefits are real, but they're invisible in the moment, which makes them poor motivators for daily behavior. So find ways to make good habits feel good right now. After exercise, don't just think about future health. Notice the energy in your body right now, the clarity, the satisfaction of having done it. Let yourself feel that fully. You can also use temptation bundling, pairing something you want with something you need. Only listen to your favorite podcast while walking. Only watch the show you love while doing chores. The brain learns to anticipate the reward and associates it with the behavior. The sixth principle is the streak. Track your habits visually. A calendar, a journal, a jar of paper clips moved one at a time. What you're building is a chain. The goal is to not break it. Not because the record matters, but because seeing the accumulation makes the invisible compound curve visible. You start to understand, concretely, that you are becoming someone different. The evidence is right there. And when you break the streak, because you will, apply the only rule that matters more than consistency. Never miss twice. Missing once is an accident. Missing twice is the beginning of a new pattern. Get back on track the next day without drama, without a fresh start, without a new plan. Just continue. Resilience isn't about never falling. It's about the speed of return. The seventh principle is gradual escalation. Once a habit is established at minimum level, increase it by the smallest viable increment. 2 push-ups becomes 3. 1 page becomes 2. 60 seconds of meditation becomes 90. This is slow. It's also the only approach that builds durability, because at every level the habit feels sustainable. The cycle of starting strong and burning out is not a discipline failure. It's a pacing failure. Extraordinary results look dramatic from the outside. From the inside, they're accumulations of small, boring, consistent decisions made over years. The person who read for 10 minutes a day for a decade has read roughly 1,200 hours of material. The person who invested $100 a month for 30 years has something most people consider impossible. The person who wrote 1 page a day for 5 years has a book, or 5. The boring version wins. It always wins. It wins because it's the only version that actually lasts. Chapter 5. The 20% that's doing all the work. You're probably working very hard on things that don't matter. Not things that feel unimportant. Things that feel urgent, necessary, legitimate. Meetings, emails, tasks, conversations, obligations that fill your day completely and leave you exhausted by evening. And yet, at the end of the week, when you look honestly at what actually moved forward, you find the same uncomfortable answer. Most of the motion wasn't progress. Most of the effort wasn't leverage. You were busy. You just weren't productive. This is not a personal failing. It's a structural reality, and it was documented over a century ago by a man who was looking at pea pods. In 1896, Italian economist Vilfredo Pareto noticed that 80% of the land in Italy was owned by 20% of the population. Curious, he started looking for the same ratio elsewhere. He found it in his garden. 80% of the peas came from 20% of the pods. He found it in wealth distribution, in business outcomes, in agricultural yields. The ratio wasn't always exact, but the principle was consistent. A small minority of inputs was generating the vast majority of outputs. What Pareto identified wasn't a quirk of economics. It was a pattern in how complex systems work. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. In any job, 80% of your meaningful output probably comes from 20% of your activities. In any sales role, 80% of revenue probably comes from 20% of clients. In any team, 80% of the real work probably comes from 20% of the members. In any portfolio, 80% of returns probably come from 20% of holdings. The specific numbers shift. The structure stays. Most people respond to this information by nodding and then continuing to do exactly what they were doing. They spread effort evenly across everything, treating all tasks as roughly equivalent, because treating them as unequal requires uncomfortable decisions. It requires identifying what matters and what doesn't, and then actually stopping the what doesn't. That second part is where most people stop. I spent a year tracking my working hours in detail, not to optimize, just to see. What I found was that roughly 3 hours of focused morning work produced more measurable output than the following 5 hours combined. The 3 hours were deep, uninterrupted, high cognitive work on the things that actually moved my projects forward. The 5 hours were everything else. Emails, small decisions, reactive tasks, meetings that could have been messages. I already suspected this. Seeing it in numbers made it impossible to rationalize away. The question the 80-20 principle demands is not what should I do more of. It's what should I stop doing entirely. This requires an audit. Take a week and track your activities honestly. Not what you plan to do, what you actually do. Then evaluate each category not by how much time it consumed, but by how much value it produced. Which activities moved your most important goals forward? Which ones kept you busy without generating anything real? The results will probably be uncomfortable. Most people discover they've been protecting low-value activities because those activities feel productive. They generate action, feedback, completion. The high-value activities are harder, more ambiguous, more uncertain, and therefore easier to defer. Protect the vital few like they're the only thing that matters, because they largely are. This means scheduling your high-value activities first, not fitting them into whatever time is left after everything else. Most people do the opposite. They handle the reactive, the administrative, the immediately responsive, and then wonder why there's no time for the important work. The important work requires your best cognitive hours. Give it those hours, and put everything else after. The 80-20 rule applies to learning as well, and this changes how you should approach skill development. In almost any domain, 80% of practical competence comes from 20% of the available knowledge. If you're learning a language, the most common 2,000 words cover roughly 90% of everyday conversation. If you're learning an instrument, a handful of chord shapes unlock the majority of popular music. If you're learning to code, a small set of core concepts underlies most practical applications. This means you can reach functional competence in most skills much faster than conventional curricula suggest. If you identify the vital 20% first and focus there. Most learning programs don't do this. They present everything as equally important, in sequence, because that's how courses are designed. You have to do your own analysis to find the leverage. In relationships, the 80-20 rule suggests that most of your genuine happiness, support, and connection comes from a small number of people. Not acquaintances, not network contacts, not people you see at recurring events, but the few relationships where there's real trust, real honesty, real mutual investment. Most people spread their relational energy too thin, maintaining dozens of surface-level connections, and end up with nothing deep. Depth requires time. Time is finite. Spreading it evenly guarantees mediocrity across everything. Identify the relationships that genuinely matter to you. Invest in those. Not exclusively, human connection has value across a spectrum, but deliberately, so the most important relationships get real attention rather than whatever's left after the rest. The same logic applies to health, to personal finance, to creative work. In health, a few behaviors, sleep, movement, whole food, stress management, produce the majority of your well-being. In finance, a few decisions. Spending less than you earn, investing consistently in low-cost instruments, avoiding debt, produce most of the wealth outcome. In creative work, a few projects, a few ideas, a few focused periods produce most of the real output. The trap in every domain is the same. You add more instead of concentrating more. You try to improve everything simultaneously instead of dramatically improving the vital few. You optimize the margins while the core sits underinvested. There's also what productivity researchers call the tyranny of small decisions. Each individual yes to a low-value activity seems harmless. A 15-minute meeting, a quick favor, a minor obligation. But collectively, they accumulate into a life where your energy is entirely consumed by things that don't compound, where you're always responsive and never generative, always maintaining and never building. The courage the 80-20 rule requires is the courage to disappoint. To decline the meeting, the request, the obligation, and accept that some people will find this inconvenient. To stop pretending that everything deserves equal attention, because it doesn't. To acknowledge that doing fewer things exceptionally well produces better outcomes than doing many things adequately. This is not laziness rebranded. It's the opposite. It's directing your full effort, your best energy, your sharpest thinking, your most focused hours, at the activities where that effort multiplies rather than merely adds. Apply it to one area first. Pick the domain where the 80-20 analysis would have the biggest impact on your life right now. Do the audit. Identify your vital few. Protect them. Eliminate or minimize everything else you responsibly can. Then watch what the concentration does. Most people are working hard. The question has never been whether you're working hard. The question is whether the work is aimed at the right 20%. Chapter 6. What you actually owe people. Most people network like they're hungry, and the other person is a vending machine. They show up to events with business cards and an agenda. They scan the room for the most useful person present. They make conversation that's really an audition. They connect on LinkedIn with a message that's a thinly disguised request wrapped in pleasantries. And then they wonder why none of it goes anywhere. Why the connections feel hollow. Why nobody ever comes through for them. Why the network they've technically built produces almost nothing of value. The reason is simple. People can feel it when they're being used. Not always consciously. But the transaction is detectable. And the moment someone detects the transaction, the relationship is over before it began. Real relationships don't start with what you need. They start with what you notice about another person. Here's what the most well-connected people in any field actually understand. A relationship is not a contact. A contact is information, a name, a title, an email address. A relationship is something built over time through genuine attention, repeated generosity, and the slow accumulation of trust. You cannot rush it, you cannot fake it, and you cannot extract value from it before you've put value in. The framework that describes this most accurately is banking. Every interaction is either a deposit or a withdrawal. You help someone without being asked, deposit. You make an introduction that benefits both parties, deposit. You share something genuinely useful with no expectation attached, deposit. You reach out only when you need something, withdrawal. You ask for a favor before you've established any real trust, withdrawal. You treat someone's time as less valuable than yours, withdrawal. Most people's relationship accounts are overdrawn. They've been making withdrawals from accounts they never funded, and they're confused about why the balance is zero. I've made this mistake. Early in my career, I reached out to someone I'd met briefly at a conference because I needed an introduction they could provide. We'd spoken for 20 minutes, maybe. I'd followed up with a connection request and nothing else. When I sent the ask, I framed it carefully, explained the context, made it sound reasonable. They replied politely. They never followed through. I understand now what I didn't understand then. I was asking for something I hadn't earned. The account was empty. The transaction failed. The antidote is not complicated. Give first. Every time. When you meet someone new, the first question isn't what can this person do for me? It's what can I do for this person? Maybe you know someone they should know. Maybe you've read something directly relevant to a problem they mentioned. Maybe you can offer a perspective they haven't considered. Maybe you just listen to them properly in a world where almost nobody does. The gift doesn't have to be large. It has to be genuine. This works partly because of reciprocity, one of the most deeply wired social instincts humans have. When someone does something for you, you feel a genuine pull to return it. But it works more powerfully for a different reason. It positions you as someone who creates value. And people who create value get called when opportunities arise, because everyone wants more of what they create. The most connected people in any network are not the most accomplished. They're the most generous. They're the ones who make introductions readily, share opportunities freely, and think of others when something relevant crosses their path. They become hubs because everyone wants to be connected to someone who moves things forward for others. Becoming a connector is one of the highest leverage things you can do relationally. When you introduce two people who genuinely benefit from knowing each other, you've created value for both of them simultaneously. They'll both remember it. Both associate you with something good happening in their professional lives. The returns on a single well-matched introduction can compound for years. Quality beats quantity in every dimension here. 10 relationships with real depth, where people know you, trust you, would go out of their way for you, are worth more than 1,000 connections who recognize your name and nothing else. Deep relationships require time and attention. Spreading both too thin guarantees you'll never have any. Decide which relationships deserve real investment. Then actually invest. This doesn't mean being strategic in a cold way. The best networkers are not the ones running spreadsheets on their relationships. They're the ones who are genuinely curious about people, not their titles, their utility, their proximity to power, but their actual lives, what they're working on, what they're trying to figure out, what they find interesting, what they're afraid of. Genuine curiosity creates genuine connection, and genuine connection is what produces the kind of relationship that actually matters when something important is at stake. Match your engagement to who you actually like. Forced relationships, maintained purely for strategic reasons with people you find draining or dull, rarely produce real value, and they cost you energy that could go toward relationships that actually nourish you. Life is too short for either hollow networking or obligatory maintenance. Spend relational energy where it genuinely flows. Follow up specifically and quickly. After meeting someone, send a message within 24 hours that references something specific from the conversation. Not a generic, "It was great to meet you," a reference to the particular problem they mentioned, the book they recommended, the idea they were working through. This signals that you were actually listening. In a world where most people are performing attention rather than paying it, actually paying attention is remarkable. Then stay in contact without being needy. This doesn't mean monthly newsletters or regular check-ins for the sake of staying visible. It means reaching out when you have something genuinely useful to share. When you see something they'd care about. When you remember an event in their life and think to acknowledge it. The standard is simple. Would I send this if I didn't need anything from them? If yes, send it. If no, wait until you have something real. Use the platforms you're already on to add value publicly. Comment on people's work thoughtfully. Share things that would be useful to your broader network. Celebrate others' achievements openly. This isn't performance. It's the digital equivalent of being the person who shows up, pays attention, and contributes to the room. Play the long game and mean it. Some relationships you build today will take 5 years to produce anything visible. Some will produce nothing directly, but will connect you to someone who changes everything. You cannot predict which relationships will matter most. You can only control whether you're worth knowing, whether you show up with generosity, with attention, with something real to offer. The people who help you most in your life will not be the ones you met at networking events. They'll be the ones who knew you long before you needed them. The ones who had a reason to care because you had given them one. Build those relationships now. Not because you need something, because that's who you've decided to be. Chapter 7. The skill that AI cannot replicate. Every job that requires a computer can eventually be done better by a computer. Except one. Not writing, not analysis, not design, coding, research, or diagnosis. All of these are being automated at varying speeds with varying degrees of success in ways that were considered impossible 5 years ago. The exception isn't a technical skill. It's the ability to understand what another person is actually feeling, to respond to that feeling in a way that matters to them, and to build the kind of trust that makes people willing to follow you somewhere difficult. Emotional intelligence. The one thing machines process data about but cannot actually do. This isn't a soft skill in the dismissive sense people usually mean. Soft skill is code for important but unmeasurable, which is code for real but easy to ignore. Emotional intelligence is neither soft nor ignorable. Research consistently shows it predicts career success better than IQ. People with high emotional intelligence earn more, lead better, maintain healthier relationships, and recover from setbacks faster. It is, in the most precise sense, a competitive advantage, and it becomes more valuable every year that automation handles more of everything else. There are 4 components. Understanding them separately is the only way to develop them systematically. The first is self-awareness, your ability to recognize what you're feeling in real time and understand how that feeling is affecting your behavior. This sounds straightforward. It isn't. Most people have significant emotional reactions and act on them before they've identified what the reaction actually is. They snap at someone and call it stress. They avoid a conversation and call it timing. They make a poor decision and call it intuition. The actual emotion, fear, shame, resentment, inadequacy, goes unnamed and therefore unexamined. Self-awareness creates space. Between the feeling and the action, it inserts a moment of recognition. That moment is where choice lives. Without it, you're just a set of conditioned reactions operating at full speed. Building self-awareness is a practice, not an insight. Several times a day, pause and ask 3 questions. What am I feeling right now? What triggered it? How is it affecting how I'm thinking and behaving? Don't evaluate the answers, just generate them. The practice of asking makes the internal state visible, and visible states can be worked with. Invisible ones run the show. The second component is self-management. What you do with the feeling once you've named it. This is not suppression. Pushing emotions down doesn't eliminate them. It relocates them, usually to a place where they emerge later at the wrong moment with extra force. Self-management is choosing your response rather than executing your reaction. The mechanism is the pause. Between any stimulus and your response, there is a moment, sometimes less than a second, where choice is possible. Most people never access it because they've never trained themselves to find it. You train it by practicing in low-stakes situations. The colleague who interrupts you, the traffic that makes you late, the email that lands badly. These are reps. Each time you pause instead of react, you're building the muscle. Each time you choose the response rather than following the impulse, the gap between stimulus and response gets longer. Reframing is the other key self-management tool. Your emotional response to an event is not determined by the event. It's determined by how you interpret the event. The same situation, a critical piece of feedback, a missed deadline, a failed attempt, can be devastating or instructive depending entirely on the frame. Learning to consciously choose a more accurate and more useful frame is not positive thinking. It's cognitive precision. The situation is what it is. Your interpretation is a choice. The third component is social awareness. Your ability to read what's happening emotionally in other people and in groups. Not what people say they're feeling. What they're actually feeling, which is often different. Most people are so focused on what they want to say next that they miss the emotional information being broadcast continuously by everyone around them. Tone of voice, posture, what someone doesn't say after you'd expect them to. The energy in a room before anyone speaks. These are signals. Emotionally intelligent people read them. Everyone else talks past them. I once walked into a meeting where everything on the agenda was procedural and nothing about the dynamic made sense. The topic was a minor scheduling issue. The tension in the room was out of proportion by an order of magnitude. 2 people weren't looking at each other. A third was speaking with unusual formality. Something had happened before I arrived that nobody was naming. The real meeting wasn't about the schedule. Treating it as if it was would have accomplished nothing. Developing social awareness requires genuine curiosity about other people's experience, not performed interest, not strategic attention, but actual wondering about what someone is going through. What are they not saying? What do they need right now that they haven't asked for? What's the emotional subtext beneath the surface conversation? When you ask these questions sincerely, you start to hear the answers. The answers are always there. The fourth component is relationship management. Using your understanding of emotions, your own and others, to navigate interactions in ways that build trust, resolve conflict, and move things forward. The most important skill here is empathy, and it's more specific than people usually assume. Empathy isn't feeling bad for someone. It's the ability to understand their experience from inside their perspective, to see the situation as they see it, to feel the weight they're carrying, to respond in a way that acknowledges their reality rather than overriding it with yours. Empathy builds trust faster than almost any other behavior. When people feel genuinely understood, they open, they collaborate, they become willing to go somewhere difficult with you. The practical expression of empathy in most situations is simple: validate before solving. Most people's first instinct when someone brings them a problem is to address the problem. But the person often isn't asking for a solution first. They're asking to be understood first. I can see why that's frustrating. That makes sense given what you're dealing with. These aren't just courtesy phrases, they're recognition. Recognition is what makes the subsequent solution land instead of bounce. Emotional contagion is the other dimension of relationship management worth understanding. Emotions are genuinely contagious, neurologically, not metaphorically. When you're in the presence of calm, you become calmer. When you're in the presence of anxiety, your nervous system picks it up. The most emotionally intelligent people don't absorb whatever emotional weather is happening around them. They bring their own. They enter a tense situation with deliberate steadiness. They don't perform calm. They actually regulate toward it, and the room adjusts. This is what makes emotional intelligence so powerful in leadership specifically. The emotional tone of any group flows disproportionately from its leader. Not from what the leader says, but from how the leader is. A leader who processes pressure with equanimity creates a team that does the same. A leader who leaks anxiety contaminates everyone. Unlike IQ, which is relatively fixed by adulthood, EQ can be developed at any age. Every interaction is a practice opportunity. The difficult conversation you handled better than you would have a year ago. The moment you paused instead of reacted. The time you stayed curious about someone's perspective instead of defending your own. Each of these builds the capacity. In a world where artificial intelligence handles more of the technical, the analytical, the procedural, the premium on the genuinely human keeps rising. The ability to understand what another person needs and respond to it skillfully. The ability to build real trust over time. The ability to hold a room together when things are falling apart. These aren't soft skills. They're the hard ones. They're just hard in a different direction than most people have been trained to look. Chatuchu. Chapter 8. Play the long game or lose the short one. Most people make decisions based on how they feel right now. This is why most people are stuck. Not stuck dramatically. Not stuck in obvious, visible ways that announce themselves clearly. Stuck in the quiet, accumulating sense of a life that keeps arriving at the same place. The same financial ceiling. The same relationship patterns. The same career plateau. The same feeling every January that this year will be different, followed by the gradual return to exactly what was there before. The problem is not effort. Most people are trying. The problem is the time horizon they're trying within. Short-term thinking is not a personality flaw. It's the default. Your brain was built for it. In the environment your ancestors inhabited, tomorrow was genuinely uncertain. The immediate threat, the predator, the storm, the rival, demanded immediate attention. Planning for decades wasn't a survival strategy. It was a luxury the environment didn't permit. So your brain optimizes for now by design and treats the future as abstract, something to deal with when it arrives. The problem is that it arrives. The retirement crisis is not caused by people making one catastrophic financial decision. It's caused by thousands of small decisions. Small purchases, deferred investments, lifestyle inflations, each one reasonable in the moment, collectively devastating over time. The health crisis is not caused by one bad meal. It's caused by years of slightly bad meals, slightly too little movement, slightly too much stress, compounding quietly until the body announces the total. Career stagnation isn't one missed opportunity. It's the accumulated result of years of not investing in skills, not building relationships, not doing the difficult work that doesn't pay off immediately. These are long-term consequences of short-term thinking, and they're almost entirely invisible until they're not. The most successful people in every domain share one cognitive habit that distinguishes them more than intelligence, more than circumstance, more than luck. They think further ahead. Not vaguely, not optimistically, but concretely. They have a specific picture of where they're going, and they run every significant decision through it. They ask not what do I want right now, but what will I wish I had done 10 years from now, standing where I want to be. This shift in time horizon changes everything. Not because the future matters more than the present, it doesn't, but because extending the horizon changes which actions look rational. A decision that looks sensible over 3 months looks different over 3 years, and completely different over 3 decades. Long-term thinking doesn't require sacrifice. It requires accuracy. It requires seeing the actual cost of short-term choices rather than just the immediate benefit. Here's how to build it practically. Start with a vision, but make it specific. Most people have never sat down and seriously imagined their life in 20 years. They have vague aspirations. More money, more freedom, more time, but no concrete picture. Vague aspirations produce vague strategies. A specific vision produces specific decisions. What do you want your daily life to actually look like in 20 years? Not the highlights, the ordinary Tuesday. What work are you doing and why? Who are the people around you? What does your body feel like? What have you built? What do you no longer have to worry about? The more viscerally real you can make this picture, the more power it has to guide present decisions. Once the vision is specific, work backwards. What needs to be true in 10 years for the 20-year picture to be achievable? What needs to be true in 5 years for the 10-year milestone to be reachable? What needs to happen this year, this quarter, this month? Now your long-term vision has traction in the present. It's not floating in the future. It's connected, step by step, to what you do today. Use the vision as a decision filter. When something comes across your path, an opportunity, a request, a temptation, a shortcut, run it through a single question. Does this move me toward the 20-year picture or away from it? Not every decision requires this level of analysis, but the significant ones do. The ones involving time, money, relationships, health, career direction. These deserve to be evaluated on the longer timeline, not just the immediate one. Long-term thinking also changes your relationship with failure. When your horizon is short, every setback is proportionally enormous. A failed project, a lost client, a bad quarter. These feel catastrophic because they represent a significant portion of the time you're thinking within. But when your horizon is decades, a failed project is a data point. A bad year is a chapter. The setback is real, but its scale relative to the total journey is different. Long-term thinkers are not less affected by failure. They're less destroyed by it. This also enables bigger risk-taking. Short-term thinkers can't afford to fail. Their timeline for recovery is too compressed. Long-term thinkers can take calculated risks because they have time to try again, adjust, learn, and try differently. The person with a 30-year horizon can absorb a 2-year detour. The person with a 2-year horizon cannot. Risk tolerance isn't personality, it's time horizon. Patience becomes possible in exactly the same way. When you know where you're going and you trust the process, you don't need immediate results to stay committed. The seed planted today doesn't insult you by not being a tree yet. You understand the timeline. You continue anyway. In a world addicted to immediate feedback, where every platform is engineered to deliver instant response, instant validation, instant signal, the person who can work in silence for years towards something invisible is operating with extraordinary leverage. Study people who think long. Read the biographies not for the highlights, but for the decisions, especially the ones that looked wrong at the time. The investment held through years of no movement. The relationship maintained through years of no obvious benefit. The skill developed through years of no external recognition. What you'll find is that the decisions that looked irrational in the short term were precisely the ones that created everything in the long term. Notice how they thought about time. Not as something to fill or survive, but as the primary resource, more valuable than money, more leverageable than skill, more determinative than circumstance. They didn't manage time. They aimed it. Thinking in decades doesn't mean ignoring the present. The present is where everything happens. It means making sure what's happening in the present is aimed at something real. It means making the trade consciously, short-term discomfort for long-term position, rather than drifting into the trade unconsciously, paying the long-term cost without ever having chosen the short-term benefit. In a world where everyone is competing for the same short-term opportunities, the person building something over decades is playing a different game entirely. Not a harder game, a less crowded one. The future comes regardless. The only question is whether you'll have been building toward it or just arriving at it. Chapter 9. Fail like a scientist. Children fall thousands of times learning to walk. They don't develop a fear of walking. Adults are stranger. At some point between learning to walk and learning to lead, something shifts. The child who fell, got up, adjusted, and fell again without interpretation, without meaning-making, without identity damage, becomes the adult who avoids anything with a realistic chance of not working. The adult who declines to apply for the job because they might not get it, who doesn't start the business because it might fail, who doesn't say the thing because it might land wrong, who lives inside a carefully managed perimeter of guaranteed outcomes, which are almost exclusively mediocre outcomes, and calls the whole arrangement being realistic. Fear of failure is not caution. It's the single most reliable way to ensure nothing significant happens. Here's what the most successful people in every field actually have in common. They fail more than unsuccessful people. Not because they're worse at what they do, because they attempt more. They run more experiments, take more swings, push further into uncertain territory. They've developed a relationship with failure that most people never build. Not a comfortable relationship, not an indifferent one, a useful one. They understand something that sounds simple and takes years to actually internalize. Failure is not a verdict, it's data. A verdict is final. A verdict says something definitive about your worth, your capability, your potential. Data is informational. Data says something about what happened in this particular attempt under these particular conditions, and here's what to adjust. These are completely different things. One ends the experiment. One continues it. And yet most people treat every failure like a verdict, because that's what they were taught. You failed the test. You failed the course. You failed the relationship. The language is judicial. The implication is permanent. Scientists don't talk this way. A hypothesis that isn't confirmed isn't a failure. It's a finding. It narrows the space of what's possible, rules out an approach, redirects the investigation. The result that doesn't match the prediction is often more interesting than the one that does. Science advances through disproven hypotheses at least as much as through confirmed ones. The failed experiment is part of the method, not an interruption of it. This framing, failure as data, not defeat, is not motivational repackaging. It's epistemologically accurate. When something doesn't work, you genuinely learn something about the system you were engaging with. The business model that failed teaches you something real about the market. The relationship that ended teaches you something real about compatibility, communication, timing. The creative project that didn't land teaches you something real about your craft and your audience. The information is there. The question is whether you extract it or just absorb the sting and move on without it. Jeff Bezos has said, "If you're not failing, you're not innovating enough." Amazon's failures are legendary and specific. The Fire Phone, Amazon Destinations, a streaming music service nobody remembers. Each one cost real money and real time. Each one also generated data that informed what came after. AWS, Alexa, Prime. These didn't emerge from pure foresight. They emerged from a culture that treated failed experiments as part of the operating cost of finding what works. The framework that makes this practical has 3 parts: fail fast, fail cheap, fail forward. Fail fast means getting signal quickly, rather than investing months or years in an approach before discovering it doesn't work. The goal is not speed for its own sake. It's reducing the cost of being wrong. The faster you find out an approach isn't working, the sooner you can adjust and try something else. Most people do the opposite. They invest heavily in an approach, and then the investment itself becomes a reason to continue past the point where the data is clearly saying, "Stop." Sunk cost becomes identity. Stopping feels like admitting failure rather than executing good judgment. Fail cheap means limiting the downside of any single experiment so that failure doesn't destroy the ability to continue. This is why good investors diversify. Not because they expect their best bet to fail, but because they know some bets will fail and they don't want any single failure to end the game. Apply this logic to your own experiments. What's the minimum viable version of this attempt that would still generate real signal? What's the smallest investment of time, money, reputation? That would tell you whether the approach is worth scaling. Start there. Fail forward means extracting the maximum learning from every failure so that each one increases the probability of future success. This requires deliberate analysis, not just reflection. When something doesn't work, ask specifically, what worked within the failure? What didn't work? What assumption turned out to be wrong? What would I do differently with the same goal? What did I learn about myself, about the system, about the problem? These aren't rhetorical questions. They deserve written answers. The people who get better faster aren't necessarily smarter. They're more systematic about learning from what went wrong. The identity separation is essential here. Your worth as a person is not measured by whether a particular attempt succeeds. Your intelligence is not determined by whether your first approach works. Your potential is not defined by your current results. These sound obvious. They don't feel obvious when you're in the middle of a significant failure. When the project collapses, the relationship ends. The opportunity doesn't come through. The emotional pull toward verdict thinking is strong. This is where the practice matters. Not "I failed at this," but "this approach didn't work." Not "I'm not good enough," but "I'm not good at this yet." Yet is doing enormous work in that sentence. It's the difference between a closed door and an open trajectory. Distinguish between types of failure. Good failures are the result of calculated risk-taking, genuine experimentation, and sound decision-making processes that produced unexpected outcomes. These are worth analyzing and even celebrating. You're developing the courage and competence to attempt things that matter. Bad failures are the result of negligence, repeated identical mistakes, or ignoring clear signal because it's uncomfortable. Bad failures deserve honest analysis of a different kind. Not "why didn't this work?" but "why did I keep going when I already knew?" Build failure tolerance into your planning. The most resilient people don't plan for things to go perfectly. They plan for things to go wrong and build in the capacity to respond. Buffers, backup approaches, decision rules for when to pivot. The person who assumes success will be smooth is perpetually surprised by friction. The person who expects friction builds responses to it in advance. Share your failures and what you learned from them. This is counterintuitive in a culture that curates success and hides struggle. But articulating what you learned from a failure does two things simultaneously. It forces you to extract the lesson clearly enough to explain it, which deepens your own understanding. And it normalizes failure for others, which is a genuine contribution. The people most worth learning from are not the ones who succeeded without setbacks. They're the ones who failed clearly, learned specifically, and kept going intelligently. The fear of failure is, in the end, a form of magical thinking. It assumes that not attempting protects you from the outcome of failing. It doesn't. It just relocates the failure. The attempt that doesn't happen is itself a failure. Quieter, less visible, but compounding over time into the most costly failure of all. The life that stayed smaller than it could have been because the risk of trying felt worse than the certainty of not. When you truly understand that failure is data, the calculus changes. The failed attempt teaches you something. The avoided attempt teaches you nothing. One of these moves you forward. The other keeps you exactly where you are, accumulating the one kind of failure with no learning attached. The most important breakthroughs in your life will probably be preceded by the most significant failures. Not despite them. Through them. Keep going. Chapter 10. Systems are smarter than you. You have goals. So does everyone who never achieves anything. Goals are not the problem. Goals are fine. Goals give you a direction to point yourself in, a rough destination, a reason to start moving. But here's what goals cannot do. They cannot show up for you on the days when motivation has evaporated. They cannot execute themselves when life gets complicated. They cannot prevent the slow drift back to default behavior that happens to virtually everyone who relies on intention alone. Goals are wishes with deadlines. Systems are what actually produce results. The distinction sounds simple. It runs deeper than most people realize. A goal is a result you want to achieve. A system is the process that generates results. A goal says, "I want to run a marathon." A system says every morning at 6, I put on my running shoes and go outside for whatever time I have. The goal points somewhere. The system goes somewhere. And the difference between pointing and going is the entire gap between aspiration and achievement. Here's what makes goals specifically problematic. beyond their unreliability. They create what might be called the arrival fallacy, the quiet, seductive belief that once you achieve the goal, something essential changes, that the attainment itself delivers the satisfaction you're building toward. This belief is almost universally disappointed. People who achieve significant goals report, with surprising consistency, a brief period of satisfaction, followed by an abrupt return to baseline. And then the uncomfortable question of what now? The destination arrived. The feeling didn't. Systems don't have this problem because they're not pointed at a destination. They're oriented toward a way of being. When your system is what matters, you can be successful today. Not eventually, not after the goal is met. Today, by following the process. Every day you execute the system, you win. The outcome becomes a byproduct of something you're already doing consistently, rather than a prize you're chasing from a distance. There's a weight loss example that illustrates this with uncomfortable clarity. The goal-focused approach says, I want to lose 30 pounds. The systems-focused approach says, I want to become the kind of person who moves their body daily and eats food that supports the life they want. The goal-focused person is miserable until they lose the weight, and then, because nothing about their identity or environment changed, they gain it back. The systems-focused person changes who they are. The weight is a side effect of that change, not a separate achievement. Identity is the deepest layer of this. James Clear's formulation is precise. Every action you take is a vote for the type of person you want to become. When you follow your system today, you're not just completing a task, you're casting a vote. 2 push-ups is a vote for the identity of someone who moves their body. 1 page is a vote for the identity of a reader. A single focused hour on important work is a vote for the identity of someone who does what matters. These votes accumulate. Eventually, the identity is established. And once the identity is established, the behavior follows naturally because it's consistent with who you are, not because you're forcing yourself to act against who you are. This is why starting with minimum viable habits matters so much. The goal of the tiny habit isn't to produce results from the habit itself. It's to establish the identity. 2 push-ups doesn't build much muscle. It builds the identity of someone who exercises. From that identity, real training can grow. But the identity has to come first. And identity is built by the smallest consistent actions, not the largest occasional ones. Building systems that work requires attention to several elements that most people skip. Environment design is the first. Your environment shapes your behavior more reliably than your motivation does. And it operates continuously, not just when you remember to apply willpower. Design the physical space around your most important systems. If your system involves morning writing, the notebook and the pen should be the first thing you see when you sit down. The phone should not be within reach. If your system involves healthy eating, the kitchen should make the good choice easy and the bad choice inconvenient. You're not fighting yourself. You're arranging the landscape so the path of least resistance runs through your system rather than around it. Habit stacking is the second. Attach new systems to existing behaviors. After I do X, I will do Y. The existing behavior is the trigger. Your brain already has grooved pathways for established routines. You leverage those rather than building entirely new ones from scratch. The specificity matters. After I sit down with my coffee, I will open my journal. Not I'll journal in the morning. After my coffee. The brain needs a concrete trigger to fire the behavior reliably. Feedback loops are the third. Track the process, not just the outcome. Most people track results. The weight on the scale, the number in the bank account, the word count of the manuscript. These are lagging indicators. They tell you what already happened. What you need is a leading indicator. Something that tracks whether you're executing the system, which is the thing you can actually control. A habit tracker, a calendar with X marks, a simple log. The goal isn't a perfect record, it's awareness of pattern. And awareness of pattern gives you something to adjust. Systems should also compound when possible. Look for ways to design systems that reinforce each other rather than competing for the same resources. Exercise and learning can compound. Audiobooks while running. Social connection and health can compound. A running group. Work and deep thinking can compound. Walking while processing problems. When systems support each other, the whole structure becomes more sustainable, and the returns become multiplicative rather than additive. Designing systems you actually enjoy is not a luxury. It's a functional requirement. A system you hate will be abandoned the moment conditions are difficult enough to give you an excuse. A system you find genuinely satisfying, or at minimum tolerable, will persist through difficulty because there's something in it worth returning to. The best system for you is not the optimal system in theory. It's the system you'll actually execute in practice, review and refine regularly. Systems that work at one stage of life or work may not work at the next. The system that got you to your first significant achievement needs to evolve to get you to the next one. Schedule periodic reviews, monthly, quarterly, where you ask honestly, what's working, what's not, what needs to change? This isn't failure. This is iteration. The system is not the point. The results the system produces are the point. Adjust accordingly. Finally, be ruthless about systems that don't serve your highest priorities. Just as the 80-20 rule applies to effort, it applies to systems. Some systems have linear returns. You put in, you get out roughly equivalently. Others compound. Every execution builds on every previous one. Prioritize the compounding systems. Building skills, deepening relationships, improving health, developing financial assets. These compound. Maintaining the status quo doesn't. The goal of building good systems is not to automate your life into efficiency. It's to ensure that your default behavior, what you do without deciding, without motivating yourself, without thinking, is moving you in the direction of the life you actually want. Most people's default behavior moves them in the direction of comfort. Systems redirect the default. You don't need more willpower. You need better architecture. Chapter 11. Your energy is the real currency. Two people have the same 24 hours. One of them gets 3 times more done. The difference isn't time. Everyone has been given the same number of hours. This is the one genuinely democratic fact about human existence. And yet the gap in what people produce with those hours is not marginal. It's enormous, sometimes by orders of magnitude. The person who attributes this gap to discipline, or work ethic, or talent, is missing something more fundamental. The variable isn't time. It's the quality of energy brought to each hour. An hour of focused, high-energy work on something important is not the same as an hour of depleted, scattered effort on the same task. The first produces real output. The second produces the feeling of having worked. These are not the same thing, and most people spend careers confusing them. Time management assumes all hours are equivalent. They aren't. Energy management understands that the same clock hour at peak cognitive function is worth 3 to 4 hours at low function. Not because you work faster, but because the thinking is clearer, the decisions are better, the output requires less revision. Managing your time without managing your energy is like scheduling meetings in rooms with no lights, and wondering why productivity is low. Energy operates on 4 levels simultaneously. Most people only think about one. Physical energy is the foundation. Your body's capacity for sustained activity, basic alertness, and physical presence. Without it, everything else collapses. And yet most people manage their physical energy in the crudest possible way. They run it down until it fails, then use caffeine to mask the failure, then wonder why they feel terrible. Physical energy is governed by sleep, movement, nutrition, and recovery, not as separate wellness concerns, but as operational requirements for cognitive performance. Sleep is the most underrated performance variable in modern professional life. Chronic sleep deprivation, defined as consistently getting less than 7 hours, produces cognitive impairment equivalent to being legally drunk. Decision quality degrades. Emotional reactivity increases. Creativity decreases. Memory consolidation fails. And because the impairment accumulates gradually, most chronically sleep-deprived people have lost the ability to accurately assess how impaired they are. They feel fine. They are not fine. The work shows it even when they can't. Mental energy is the second level, and in a knowledge economy, it's the primary resource. Your brain consumes roughly 20% of your total energy budget. Mental fatigue is real and measurable. It shows up as slower processing, worse decisions, reduced impulse control, and decreased ability to hold complex problems in working memory. Most people have never been taught to manage it. They treat their brain like a machine that should run continuously, and then interpret the degradation as laziness or lack of focus rather than depletion. Mental energy is consumed primarily by 3 things. Decisions. Every choice you make, regardless of importance, draws from the same pool. Multitasking. The brain doesn't actually multitask. It task switches, and each switch costs energy in the form of cognitive reset. And sustained concentration. Deep focus depletes the capacity for deep focus over time, which is why the 4th hour of intense intellectual work produces less than the first. This is why successful people automate trivial decisions. Steve Jobs wore the same outfit. Mark Zuckerberg maintains a closet of identical shirts. Obama ordered from a restricted menu. These aren't affectations, they're energy management. Every decision eliminated is cognitive capacity preserved for decisions that actually matter. Applied to your own life, this might mean standardizing your morning routine, planning meals in advance, batching similar decisions together, or simply identifying which daily choices are genuinely important and which ones are just friction. I went through a period of tracking my productive output by hour of day for several weeks. The pattern was stark and consistent. My best thinking happened in a narrow window in the morning, roughly a 90-minute block where the work was clear, the decisions were sharp, and the writing came easily. After lunch, the quality dropped noticeably. By late afternoon, I was maintaining the appearance of working more than the substance of it. The hours were the same length. The output was completely different. I had been scheduling my important work around my low-energy periods and filling my peak hours with email. Emotional energy is the 3rd level and the most frequently overlooked. Your emotional state determines the quality of your thinking, the effectiveness of your communication, your resilience under pressure, and your basic willingness to engage. When emotional energy is high, difficult tasks feel manageable. When it's depleted, routine tasks feel overwhelming. And emotional energy is drained by specific things: conflict, toxic relationships, unresolved tensions, interactions that feel inauthentic, environments that require you to be someone you're not. The people you spend time with have an enormous impact on your emotional energy. This isn't abstract. The research on emotional contagion is specific. Time with people who are chronically negative, dramatic, or anxious depletes your emotional reserves measurably. Time with people who are energizing, genuine, and generative restores them. Most people treat this as a preference rather than a management issue. It isn't a preference. It's an operating condition. Spiritual energy is the fourth level, and the term is easily misunderstood. This isn't religious energy. It's the energy that comes from feeling that your work matters, that your effort is connected to something larger than the immediate task, that the direction you're moving is one you've actually chosen. Purpose is a fuel source, not a soft, inspirational one, a functional one. People operating with a clear sense of purpose sustain performance through conditions that would exhaust people operating without it. The teacher who believes in what they're doing can work long hours for lower pay. The entrepreneur who is genuinely building something can absorb years of uncertainty. The athlete who has a reason beyond the sport can train through conditions that break competitors. When spiritual energy is depleted, when work feels meaningless, direction feels absent, effort feels disconnected from anything that matters, the result is burnout. Not tiredness. Burnout. The specific condition of having nothing left because you've been running without fuel. Managing energy practically starts with an honest audit. For 1 week, track your energy levels at regular intervals throughout the day. Not your mood, your actual functional capacity. The ability to focus, to decide clearly, to engage with difficulty. Note what preceded the high points and what preceded the low ones. Patterns will emerge quickly. Most people discover their peak window is narrower than they assumed, and their low periods are longer. Then redesign the schedule around the findings. Peak energy hours go to the most important work. The work that requires real thinking, real creativity, real decision quality. Moderate energy hours go to meetings, communication, administrative tasks. Low energy hours go to rest, routine, or genuinely mechanical activities. This sounds obvious. Almost nobody does it, because calendars are filled by external demand rather than internal biology. Create rituals that manage transitions between energy states. A morning routine that activates rather than depletes. A midday reset that genuinely restores rather than just filling time. An evening practice that discharges the day rather than carrying it into sleep. The specific content matters less than the consistency. Your nervous system learns from repetition. Give it reliable signals about what state is required and when. Protect your peak energy with the same seriousness you'd protect a critical appointment. Because it is one. With the version of yourself capable of doing the work that matters. Time is finite. You cannot make more of it. But energy, managed properly, is renewable. The same hours, brought to with genuine vitality, produce genuinely different results. This is not a metaphor. It is the mechanism by which some people accomplish in 4 hours what others cannot accomplish in 12. Manage the energy. The time takes care of itself. Chapter 12. Say what you mean. The most expensive thing in most organizations isn't salaries. It's confusion. The meeting that produced no decision because nobody said what they actually meant. The project that went sideways because the brief was ambiguous and nobody clarified. The relationship that eroded because something important went unsaid for months until it came out sideways. The opportunity that didn't materialize because the communication was vague enough that the other person wasn't sure what was being asked. Confusion is everywhere. It compounds quietly, and almost all of it is preventable. Most communication failures are not failures of information. They're failures of clarity. The information was technically present. The meaning was not transmitted. And the gap between those two things is where enormous amounts of time, money, and trust disappear. Here's the assumption that causes most of it. The assumption that because you understand what you mean, the other person understands what you mean. This assumption is wrong almost constantly. You have access to your full context, your intentions, your background reasoning, your unstated qualifications, your mental model of the situation. The other person has access to your words. These are not the same thing. The burden of clarity sits entirely on the person communicating, not on the listener to interpret correctly, on the speaker to transmit accurately. Most people have this backwards. They speak in shorthand, assume shared context that doesn't exist, use language that means different things to different people, and then attribute misunderstandings to the other person's failure to understand, rather than their own failure to clarify. Clear communication starts with accepting full responsibility for whether your meaning arrived. Before clear communication comes clear thinking. You cannot transmit what you haven't organized. The most common source of vague communication is not poor vocabulary or underdeveloped speaking skills. It's thinking that hasn't been completed before the speaking begins. Most people start talking in order to figure out what they think. The result is communication that works as personal processing, but fails as actual transmission. Rambling, qualifying, circling, eventually landing somewhere the listener had to work hard to follow. The discipline is to do the thinking before the speaking. Ask yourself, before you communicate anything significant, what exactly am I trying to say? What do I need this person to understand, feel, or do as a result of this communication? What's the single most important point? If you can answer these questions clearly before you open your mouth, the communication that follows will be qualitatively different. Structure your communication with the conclusion first. This goes against most people's instinct, which is to lay out background, context, and reasoning before arriving at the point, as if the point needs to be earned. It doesn't. People's attention is finite and front-loaded. The first 30 seconds of any communication receive more cognitive engagement than the next 5 minutes. Put your most important point there, then support it. The listener who knows where you're going will follow the reasoning more easily. The listener who doesn't know where you're going is spending cognitive energy trying to figure out the destination instead of tracking the argument. Be specific in a way that eliminates interpretation. There's a precise difference between, "I'll get back to you soon," and "I'll email you by Thursday at noon with my decision." The first requires the other person to interpret what soon means and creates no accountability. The second is unambiguous and creates clear expectation. The same principle applies everywhere. "We need to improve performance" is a sentiment. "We need to increase conversion rate by 15% in Q3. And here are 3 specific changes that will get us there," is a communication. One of these moves something forward. The other creates the feeling of having addressed the issue without actually addressing it. Use simple language. This is advice that's been given so many times it sounds obvious, but most people still violate it regularly. The instinct to use complex language in professional or high-stakes contexts comes from a misunderstanding of what creates credibility. Complexity signals effort. Clarity signals mastery. The person who can explain something complicated in simple terms understands it better than the person who requires complexity to discuss it. Complexity often conceals thinking that hasn't been completed. Simplicity exposes thinking that has. Remove filler. The ums, likes, basicallys, and you knows that punctuate most people's speech are not harmless padding. They signal uncertainty. Not necessarily about the content, sometimes about the speaker's authority to deliver it. The brain of the listener picks this up subconsciously and adjusts its assessment of your credibility downward. Speaking without filler requires slowing down slightly, pausing rather than filling, and tolerating the brief silence that your nervous system interprets as failure, but your listener experiences as confidence. Listen more than you speak. This appears in every communication guide ever written, which suggests it's either very important or very hard to actually do. It's both. Most people in conversation are managing two activities simultaneously: processing what the other person is saying and preparing what they're going to say next. These compete. The result is that you hear about 60% of what's being communicated and miss the rest. Active listening, genuinely suspending your own preparation and focusing fully on what's being said, produces a different quality of understanding. You catch what's not being said alongside what is. You notice the emotional content beneath the informational content. You hear the question behind the question. When people feel genuinely heard, they become more open, more honest, more willing to engage with difficulty. Most of the communication failures that escalate into real conflict could have been resolved earlier if someone had listened well enough to understand what was actually being said, rather than responding to their own interpretation of it. Match your communication style to the person you're communicating with. Different people process information differently and need different things from communication. Some people want the data first and the implications second. Others need the emotional context established before they can engage with information. Some want all the details. Others want the bottom line and will ask for details if they need them. Reading which mode someone operates in and adjusting accordingly is not manipulation, it's competence. The goal of communication is for meaning to arrive. Format is in service of that goal. Use stories. The human brain is not optimized for receiving information in the form of abstractions. It's optimized for narrative, sequence, causality, character, consequence. A principle stated abstractly is processed and often forgotten. The same principle illustrated through a specific scene, one person, one moment, one concrete detail, is retained and can be recalled and applied. When you want something to stick, make it a story, not a long story, a precise one, the shortest story that carries the meaning. Prepare for difficult conversations rather than improvising them. If you need to deliver hard feedback, decline something important, or address a conflict that's been building, think it through first. What's the core point? What's the most accurate and least charged way to say it? What response is the other person likely to have, and how will you receive it? Preparation doesn't make difficult conversations easy. It makes them less likely to go wrong in ways you'll regret. Finally, verify that your meaning arrived. Don't assume that because you communicated clearly, understanding occurred. Ask, what questions do you have? How does this land for you? What would you add? These aren't signs of insecurity. They're signs that you care whether the communication worked, not just whether you completed the act of communicating. The quality of your communication determines the quality of your relationships, your opportunities, and your ability to move things that matter forward. Most people improve every other skill deliberately and leave communication to chance. The person who develops it deliberately operates with advantages that compound in every direction. Say what you mean what you say. Make sure it arrived. Chapter 13. Money is a tool you keep using wrong. Most people work hard for money their entire lives. Very few of them understand what money is, not philosophically, practically. What it actually does, how it actually behaves, what it genuinely enables versus what people believe it enables. The confusion isn't about amounts. People with very little money misunderstand it. People with significant money misunderstand it. The misunderstanding is structural, and it produces the same patterns regardless of income level. Stress, poor decisions, a persistent feeling that there's never enough, and a relationship with money that feels more like captivity than utility. Money is stored value. That's it. When you do something useful for someone, solve a problem, create something, provide a service, they give you a token representing that value, which you can exchange later for someone else's stored effort. Money is not reward, not status, not security in itself. It's a medium of exchange for value that already happened. Understanding this at a functional level changes how you relate to it. The first distortion most people carry is emotional rather than logical. Money was charged with meaning long before you were old enough to think about it critically. In some households, it represented safety. In others, conflict. In others, something slightly shameful. Earned through compromise. Never quite enough. Associated with people who had more of it being different in ways that weren't admirable. These associations formed before you had any framework to evaluate them. They're running in the background of every financial decision you make. Common limiting beliefs about money are worth naming precisely because they're invisible until named. Money is the root of all evil, a misquotation that has been used to make virtue synonymous with financial struggle. Rich people are greedy, a generalization that makes wealth itself the evidence of moral failure. I don't deserve wealth, a belief that functions as an instruction to self-sabotage whenever financial progress becomes possible. There's not enough to go around, a scarcity framing that makes wealth feel like something taken from others rather than created. These beliefs aren't examined, they're inherited. And they produce behavior that's entirely rational given the belief. Avoiding financial risk, self-sabotaging at critical moments, spending in ways that prevent accumulation, resenting the financially successful rather than studying them. The behavior makes perfect sense. The belief driving it is wrong. Money is not scarce. It is created when value is created. Every time someone solves a problem that matters to others, money flows toward that solution. The total amount of money in the world is not fixed. It expands when value expands. This means your financial situation is not determined by how large a slice of a fixed pie you can capture. It's determined by how much value you create and how effectively you retain and direct what flows toward you as a result. And this reframe is not optimism, it's accuracy. And it shifts the primary question from how do I get more money to what value am I creating and for whom, which is a question that tends to produce actual answers. The fundamental mechanics of wealth building are genuinely simple. Spend less than you earn. Invest the difference consistently over time. Let compound interest do the work that takes decades to see and cannot be rushed. These three instructions contain essentially everything you need. The reason they're so rarely followed isn't ignorance. It's that they're boring, they're slow, and they produce no immediate feedback. Lifestyle inflation is the specific mechanism that defeats most people who would otherwise succeed at this. Income rises. Spending rises with it, sometimes ahead of it. The gap between earning and spending that should be widening stays narrow or disappears entirely. Every raise, every promotion, every windfall gets absorbed into a higher baseline of expenses, most of which were chosen quickly and feel mandatory within months. The standard of living expands. The wealth doesn't. The discipline required to avoid this is not complicated. Every time income increases, direct a meaningful portion of the increase toward investment before adjusting lifestyle. Not all of it. Enjoying increased income is legitimate and sustainable. But some predetermined fraction, moved automatically before it's available to spend, builds the compounding position that produces real financial freedom over time. Automate this. The decision made once in advance overrides 1,000 smaller decisions made in real time under the influence of wanting things. Understand the asset-liability distinction at a practical level. An asset puts money into your pocket on an ongoing basis. A liability takes money out. This is not the accounting definition. It's Robert Kiyosaki's formulation, and it's more useful for daily thinking. Your primary residence is, for most people, a liability. It requires mortgage payments, taxes, insurance, maintenance. It may appreciate, but until you sell it, that appreciation is theoretical. A rental property generating positive cash flow is an asset. Stocks paying dividends are assets. A business generating income beyond your labor is an asset. The goal is to accumulate things that produce income rather than things that consume it, and to be honest about which category any given purchase falls into. Invest in yourself before you invest in anything else. This is not a motivational statement. It's a financial one. Skills, knowledge, and capabilities are the assets with the highest potential return and the only ones that cannot be taken from you by market conditions, economic shifts, or bad luck. A skill that increases your earning capacity by 20% is worth more than most investment returns. A decision to develop expertise in a high-demand area compounds differently than a stock portfolio. It's less liquid, less measurable, and dramatically higher ceiling. Compound interest deserves more than a passing mention. Einstein may or may not have called it the eighth wonder of the world, but the mathematics deserve direct examination. A 25-year-old who invests $200 a month at a 7% average annual return will have more than $500,000 at 65. A 35-year-old making the same monthly investment will have roughly half that. 10 years of delay at the same investment rate produces roughly half the outcome. Time is not one variable among several in compound growth. It's the primary variable. Starting small and early dominates starting large and late, and this is not intuitive until you actually run the numbers. Don't try to get rich quickly. Every get-rich-quick scheme is a get-poor-quick scheme with better marketing. The specific mechanisms change: tulips, real estate, crypto, AI startups, network marketing. But the structure is always the same. Something is rising fast. Social proof is being applied. Urgency is being manufactured. The people who got in early are very visible. The people who got in late and lost everything are not. The human brain is poorly calibrated for this asymmetry. It sees the winners and discounts the losers, because the losers aren't in the story being told. Build multiple income streams over time. Not simultaneously, sequentially, as each one stabilizes. Your primary income first, then a secondary skill or service that generates additional income, then an investment position that generates passive income, then potentially a business or asset that runs without your daily involvement. This isn't a get-rich instruction, it's a get-resilient one. Single income streams are fragile. Multiple streams provide both security and growth capacity. Spend deliberately on experiences and relationships, rather than reflexively on possessions. Research on subjective well-being is consistent here. Experiences produce more lasting satisfaction than objects. They become integrated into identity. They're part of who you are, rather than what you own. And their value is less susceptible to the hedonic treadmill, the process by which the pleasure of acquisition fades as the new becomes familiar. A dinner with people who matter generates memory and connection. The equivalent amount spent on an object generates diminishing returns from the moment it's unwrapped. Use money as a force multiplier for your actual values. Money amplifies. If you're generous, more money means more generosity. If you value freedom, more money means more freedom. If you want to make a difference in something specific, more money gives you more capacity to do it. The concern that money changes people is accurate, but the direction of change follows what was already there. Money doesn't install values, it scales them. Finally, don't let the management of money consume more of your mental life than is warranted. The basics, executed consistently, produce the outcome. You don't need to become a financial sophisticate. You need to spend less than you earn, invest consistently in simple instruments, avoid debt that isn't productive, and let time do what time does. The complexity of financial products is largely in service of the financial industry, not in service of your actual wealth building. Money is a tool. Use it to build the life you want. Don't let it become the life itself. Chapter 14. The body that runs everything else. You can optimize your calendar, your habits, your mindset, and still be defeated by a body you ignored. This happens more than people acknowledge. The person who built a successful career while quietly dismantling their health, and then spent the earnings trying to repair the damage. The executive at peak professional achievement, who can't enjoy it because their energy is gone, and their body is issuing warnings they can no longer ignore. The person who finally has the life they wanted and doesn't have the physical capacity to live it fully. These aren't cautionary tales. They're common outcomes of a specific prioritization error, treating health as a background condition rather than the infrastructure on which everything else runs. Your body is not separate from your performance. It is your performance. Every cognitive output, every emotional response, every decision quality, every capacity for sustained effort runs on biological hardware. When the hardware degrades, everything running on it degrades with it. There is no version of your best work that doesn't require a functioning body. There is no version of a rich life that doesn't require energy to inhabit it. The tragedy is that most significant health problems are preventable. The leading causes of premature death and chronic disability in developed countries, heart disease, type 2 diabetes, certain cancers, stroke, are predominantly lifestyle-related. Not entirely, not in every case, but predominantly. Which means you have more control over your health outcomes than most people exercise. The question isn't whether the choices matter. They demonstrably do. The question is whether you're making them. There are 4 pillars, not 12, not 50. 4. Master these and you've addressed the vast majority of what determines your long-term health. The first is nutrition, and the principle is simpler than the industry built around it wants you to believe. Eat real food, food that existed before factories, food your great-grandmother would recognize without reading the label. Vegetables, fruits, meat, fish, eggs, nuts, seeds, legumes, whole grains. These foods provide what your body needs and don't contain what damages it. The industrial seed oils, the refined sugars, the chemical additives, the hyperpalatable combinations engineered specifically to override your satiety signals and keep you eating past hunger. The processed food industry has one goal that is not your health. It has significant resources dedicated to achieving that goal and decades of research into exactly which combinations of fat, salt, and sugar trigger compulsive eating behavior. You are not weak for finding these foods hard to resist. You are a normal human being responding to something specifically designed to overwhelm normal human resistance. The most effective strategy is not willpower at the point of temptation. It's not having the product in your environment in the first place. The 80-20 principle applies here with genuine precision. Eat whole, real food 80% of the time, and you can be flexible the other 20 without meaningful health consequences. Perfectionism in nutrition doesn't produce better health outcomes. It produces restriction, guilt, and eventually rebellion. Consistency, not perfection, is the standard that matters. The second pillar is movement, and the human body was designed for it in a way that makes sustained inactivity specifically damaging rather than just suboptimal. Sitting for extended periods increases cardiovascular risk, degrades metabolic function, weakens the musculoskeletal system, and impairs mood. None of these effects require dramatic inactivity to accumulate. They begin with the sedentary patterns that modern work and leisure have normalized. The minimum effective dose is genuinely modest. 150 minutes of moderate cardiovascular activity per week, roughly 20 minutes daily, produces substantial health benefits. Walking counts, cycling counts, swimming counts. Any sustained movement that elevates your heart rate modestly counts. The bar is not high. Most people clear it on good weeks and abandon it entirely on bad ones. The consistency matters far more than the intensity. Strength training is the underemphasized half. After 30, muscle mass declines at roughly 3 to 5% per decade without active resistance training. This matters beyond aesthetics. Muscle mass governs metabolic rate, bone density, functional capacity, and the ability to recover from illness or injury. The person who maintains muscle mass through their 50s and 60s is a different physical organism from the one who doesn't. More resilient, more energetic, metabolically healthier. 2 sessions of strength training per week is enough to substantially change this trajectory. Find movement you genuinely enjoy. Not movement you can tolerate, movement you look forward to. The best exercise protocol is the one you'll actually execute consistently over years, not the one that's theoretically optimal, but requires constant self-coercion to maintain. If you hate running, running is not your exercise. If you love dancing, dancing is. If competitive sport motivates you where solo training doesn't, join a team. The psychological sustainability of the habit matters more than its specific content. The third pillar is sleep, and it is non-negotiable in a way that most people resist accepting. Sleep is not rest. It's active biological maintenance. During sleep, your brain clears metabolic waste products that accumulate during waking hours and are associated with neurodegenerative disease. Your body repairs damaged tissue. Your immune system consolidates its response. Memory and learning are processed and integrated. Growth hormone peaks. Emotional regulation is restored. When you chronically shortchange sleep, operating on 6 hours when your biology requires 8, the consequences are specific and measurable. Decision quality declines. Emotional reactivity increases. Immune function weakens. Cardiovascular risk rises. The capacity for empathy decreases. And because cognitive impairment from sleep deprivation accumulates gradually, most chronically sleep-deprived people have lost accurate insight into how impaired they actually are. They report feeling fine. Their performance data says otherwise. 7 to 9 hours is the range most adults require, not as a luxury, as a biological minimum for normal function. Protecting this requires treating sleep with the same seriousness as important professional commitments, scheduling it, defending it against encroachment, and creating conditions that support it. A cool, dark, quiet room, consistent sleep and wake times, including weekends, no screens in the hour before bed, no caffeine after early afternoon. These are not aspirational wellness habits. They are basic sleep hygiene that the available evidence consistently supports. I had a period of treating sleep as negotiable, cutting it to find more hours for work, treating exhaustion as evidence of commitment rather than a signal that something was wrong. The work produced in those extra hours was worse than what I would have produced, rested in fewer. The decision quality degraded in ways I only recognized in retrospect. The math on sleep deprivation is consistently negative. You don't gain productive hours by sacrificing sleep. You borrow them from tomorrow at a significant interest rate. The fourth pillar is stress management, specifically chronic stress management. And it is the most overlooked determinant of health in modern professional life. Acute stress is functional. Your body's stress response evolved to handle genuine threats by mobilizing energy, sharpening focus, and preparing for action. Once the threat passes, the system returns to baseline. This is normal and healthy. Chronic stress, the sustained activation of the stress response in the absence of a resolvable immediate threat, is different in kind, not just degree. When cortisol remains elevated over months or years, it damages cardiovascular tissue, suppresses immune function, impairs memory and learning, disrupts sleep, promotes inflammation, and degrades the prefrontal cortex function you need for good decisions. You can eat well, exercise regularly, and sleep adequately, and chronic stress will still work against all of it. Effective stress management isn't a single technique. It's a toolkit you use regularly rather than only when overwhelmed. Meditation, even 10 minutes of focused breathing daily, produces measurable reductions in cortisol and changes in brain structure associated with better emotional regulation. Time in nature reduces stress markers reliably across studies. Physical movement processes stress hormones directly. Genuine social connection, not digital, not performative, but actual human presence, is one of the most powerful stress regulators available. Creative activity disengages the ruminating, anxious mind in ways that passive consumption doesn't. Prevention is the correct frame for all of this. The time to build these practices is before you need them urgently. The investment in health today is an investment in the quality and length of everything that follows. The money spent on good food, on movement, on adequate sleep, on stress management is not a cost competing with other priorities. It's infrastructure maintenance on the system that runs everything else. Without the body, there is no calendar to optimize. There are no habits to compound. There are no relationships to invest in. There is no long game to play. Take care of it like it's the only one you get, because it is. You've now heard 15 principles. You already knew most of them. That's not a criticism. It's the point. The gap between where you are and where you want to be is almost never a knowledge gap. It's an execution gap. The distance between knowing something and actually living it is where most lives stall. Not dramatically, not all at once, but in the quiet, daily accumulation of knowing better and doing otherwise. Nothing in this book requires talent you don't have. Nothing requires circumstances you haven't been given. Everything requires the same thing, applied repeatedly over time. The decision to act on what you know instead of simply knowing it. You will forget most of this. That's also normal. Return to the parts that landed. Apply one thing, then another. Not all 15 simultaneously. That's how nothing gets done. One principle, implemented genuinely, changes more than 15 principles held loosely. The people who transform their lives aren't the ones who found better information. They're the ones who took ordinary information seriously enough to actually use it. You have everything you need. The only question left is what you do today.